Okay, now we're going to hear the keynote speaker. This year's keynote speaker is Susan Randall. Susan Randall will share her unique perspective on Vermont's criminal justice system. She has her own private firm called Vermont Private Eye and has worked as a defense investigator on civil, state, and federal cases for over the last 24 years. Prior to working as a private investigator, Susan worked as a journalist and a documentary filmmaker in New York City for A&E Television, the BBC, and NPR. I've watched a few different documentaries that Susan has been in, and I think I've been involved in a few cases in which Susan has been involved in, and she is an extraordinary talent who does great work on behalf of her clients. So please join me in welcoming Susan Randall. Susan.
Thank you, TJ. It's nice to be on the same side here. So I can't tell you what an extraordinary honor this is to be here tonight. I'm not usually at a podium. I'm usually behind the scenes, driving around in my station wagon mom car, knocking on doors, and basically filling the wheelbarrow of facts about different cases and about different people's lives. So I've been working as a private investigator in Vermont for the last 23 years. And I feel incredibly honored for the fact that I have a front row seat on people's lives and what brought them to the places that they end up. Many of the people that have been in my caseloads have also ended up at the Dismas house. My first experience finding out about the Dismas house was actually through David McCulgan, who's here tonight. David, where are you? Are you? This is David. I feel blessed to know David. He's my neighbor and also was a federal defender when I worked as an investigator at the Federal Defender's Office. David's part of an organization called Art of Living, which we're the first Monday of the month. We do a dinner at the Buell Street House, and I've had the privilege of taking part in some meditations that David will bring in for the residents, which is kind of amazing. Anyway, just to give you a little bit of an idea, I'm sure it's kind of like private investigator. Why is a private investigator talking at the Dismas House benefit? The people that I work for are primarily defense attorneys. So I consider myself a defense investigator. So I work for many, many indigent clients on the federal level. I work for the CJA panel, which is the Criminal Justice Administration. If you're charged with a federal crime, you generally have either the federal defender that represents you or somebody on the CJA panel. I also investigate cases for the serious felony unit, which is basically the most serious felonies in the state. So a lot of what my job has been over the last couple decades has been interviewing clients in prison, driving down the dark dirt roads in backwoods of Vermont, knocking on trailer doors, walking past dogs tied to stakes with a little piece of Wonder Bread out of reach. I generally park my car facing out with the keys in the ignition because I'm not always sure what I'm gonna bump into. And people tell me their most traumatic, devastating stories of what's happened to them throughout their lives that brought them to the place that they end up in. And I feel honored to hear these stories, and I feel like I'm a keeper of stories. Over the years, there are two different parts. If you're an investigator, in my world, there's sort of two parts of what you investigate. The first part is the fact investigation, which is kind of like what you watch on CSI, the ballistics, the fingerprints, what was the caliber of the gun, what's the eyewitness, get the CCTV, let's look at the surveillance video. The other part has to do with who is this human being who's sitting in front of me, who's wound up in trouble, and how did they get here? And I can't tell you how many people have asked me over the years, how can you do this work? How can you possibly defend somebody who's done that crime? And what I will tell you is that every single one of my clients has a story. And most of them have stories about things that happened to them when they were children. I would say over 90% are people who were traumatized as children. So without even knowing what I was getting into, I pretty much have a PhD in poverty, abuse, trauma, vicarious trauma, multi-generational trauma, addiction, and mental illness, because that is who fills our prisons. So when I first went to Dismas House, when David said, you know, the Art of Living is going to be bringing a meal in, you know, as part of the volunteer part of Art of Living, and I went and I sat down with people at the first time I had dinner, I really felt like what's going on at Dismas House is a spiritual phenomenon. I feel as though I finally was in a place where people understood what my job has taught me, which is that our greatest fear and our greatest desire is to be seen. I'm going to say that again because I really think it's true. Our greatest fear and our greatest desire is to truly be seen. Most of the people that I meet, when I do what they call a client intake, I'll go to the jail and I sit down in the attorney room and I start hearing about someone's life. And usually their arms are crossed. They don't trust me. They have no reason to trust me. They haven't had a reason to trust anybody. And then they start to open up. And then I have to win their confidence, and I have to come back. And I have to come back again and again and again. And I have to call, and I have to check in on them. And there's something called hierarchy of needs. Does anybody here know of that term, the hierarchy of needs? So the hierarchy of needs is something that really matters. Hierarchy of needs in my world means if somebody walks in and sits down in the attorney room in the jail and they have hives everywhere because they're allergic to the soap in the jail, it means that I can't talk to them about their charges until I let their caseworker know that they're allergic to the soap. If they're obsessed about their ex-wife having the car keys to their truck, I better deal with that before we start talking about any kind of plea agreement. Hierarchy of needs is what Dismas House is dealing with. You can't start talking to somebody about anything when they don't have shoes, when they don't have a meal, when they don't have community. I also think the specificity of every single person's story is really, really important. When I sat down to try to write something to say to you tonight, I started thinking back about the origins of me wanting to get involved with this kind of work. And I was thinking it was going to be some other investigator or an attorney, and I realized it was my father. My dad is a family doc. He's a really friendly, jolly kind of guy. He's the kind of guy that if you're standing in line at the bank, he's going to strike up a conversation with you. I got to tell you, when I was a teenager, I would just cringe. I was like, Dad, don't talk to anybody. You know, I couldn't go through the toll booth without my dad knowing about 3 or 4 pieces of information about the poor woman behind who just wanted to get the dollar bill. But what I learned from my father was that it's all about connection, and it's all about compassion. And connection and compassion is what Dismas House, those are the keys to the kingdom. That's what Dismas House has figured out. In my job, if I don't connect with people, I don't get the goods. On a very pragmatic level, I won't find out what happened. But if I don't actually care about people, I also can't do my job. So part of my job is what we call mitigation. And mitigation is the second half of what I do as an investigator. So I used to wait to present mitigation to sentencing, to when it was coming time for someone to be sentenced. In the federal system, there's something called 3553A, which is the history and the characteristics of the defendant must be taken into account. The longer I did this job, the more I started scratching my head and thinking, why are we waiting? Why are we waiting? Why are we waiting until sentencing to find out the history and characteristics of the defendant? These prosecutors have an enormous amount of power in the system. I'm not dissing you, TJ, I'm just saying. They have an enormous amount of power, and they are human beings, and they have hearts, and they have mothers, and they have children. So what I started doing was putting together what we call a mitigation package, which is how do I meet the client, get a release signed, and get all the records of this person's life so that if they aren't comfortable reporting to me what happens, I can read about it in their DCF record. I can interview their neighbor. I can find out from their kindergarten teacher. I can talk to the Sisters of Mercy and find out what happened at Trinity when they were there. I have to fill the wheelbarrow with all the information about what happened to this person's life. And so what I've started doing is, I used to work for A&E Television for Biography, talking about the stories of mobsters and millionaires. What I've done over the last 15 years is I've started making these little mini documentaries about these defendants' lives. And what happened? What happened along the way? What were the vulnerabilities? What was the story that their father screamed at them in the hallway? What happened when they were whipped with a cord in the bathtub? These stories, the details matter. I have a hero in this world of mitigation. I work on death penalty cases sometimes around the country, and there's a woman by the name of Charlotte Holdman who passed recently, rest her soul. I'm sure she's out there went right through the pearly gates, this one. When everybody else was running the other way, Charlotte would run right in to what happened, whether it was the Oklahoma bomber, whether it was the Unabomber. She would try to find out what happened, what brought this person to this place. And Charlotte would weave her client's life into the bigger fabric of humanity. She would start her sentencing memos with, like the Jodes in the Grapes of Wrath. How many people here have read the Grapes of Wrath? So you know, this destitute family in the Depression, right? But she viewed every single client as a thread that made up the fabric of this country. And I really took that to heart. And what I started to understand from Charlotte, and Charlotte had quite a history. Charlotte had a father that was in the Ku Klux Klan. She watched unbelievable racism in the South, and then went to work as a mitigation specialist representing many, many, many black men on death row. And what I learned from Charlotte Holdman and from Russ Stetler was that the cracks really are where the light comes through. Our vulnerabilities and where we are broken is actually where we connect. And I will say, when I talk to people that have gone to Dismas' house to have dinner, and I say to them, so what surprised you? What surprised you about coming to dinner? What did you think? And they say, oh, I was actually really scared. I was really scared. You know, here's this person that's just so different than me. And when I sat down, I had such a great time. They're just like me. They're just like me. They're just another human being. They're another human being that didn't come from the same starting place. Many of us in this room started on second or third base, hate to say it. A lot of the people in my caseload, that's actually not the case at all. One of the things I've tried to understand along the way doing this job is what every single human being needs to develop into a human being. And often I'll actually make a timeline of a case of a person's life, and I mark down what the records were as my source, and then I line it up next to what every single human being needs to develop, and then I try to tell that story. The prosecutor will come into the courtroom and they will tell one story about what happened, and then we get a chance to tell the other story. And sometimes you can hear a pin drop. Sometimes we get it right. And sometimes we're able to explain what happened to this person when they were 2 years old, when they were 6 years old, when they were 7 years old. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we're looking at in the world in terms of poverty, in terms of mass incarceration. And I wonder, am I being effective? Am I actually making a difference? And then I go to Dismas House, and I have to say, I need Dismas House. I mean that. I need Dismas House. I'm not going to say that I need it more than the residents need Dismas House, but I feel hope. I see change. I see love. I see caring. I see human beings being human beings. And I bear witness to us being our best selves. And when I look out in this room tonight, I see human beings being their best selves and giving to people that are complete strangers because they know that they need a hand up. And I had all kinds of things I had written down, and I'm not even looking at it. It's kind of funny. But I just would like to share one thing that Brian, does anybody here know Brian Stevenson, who started the Equal Justice Initiative? He's another one of my heroes. If you haven't read the book Just Mercy, see if you can get a copy or maybe see the film. He says, you judge the character of a society not by how they treat their rich and their powerful and their privileged, but how they treat the poor, the condemned, the incarcerated. Because it's in that nexus that we actually begin to understand truly profound things about who we are. And I have to say, I feel blessed that I've been able to do the work that I have been able to do over the years. I feel honored to have people share with me their darkest secrets and the things that they're the most ashamed about. Nobody wants to admit that they're addicted to drugs. Nobody wants to admit that they were molested by a relative. Nobody wants to admit what they've done. And yet they do, and I don't judge them. And I feel that in this process of, I'll say to people, non-judgment day is coming. Non-judgment day is coming. But for the grace go I, given a different set of circumstances, given a different childhood, given a different mother and father, I could be in a very, very, very different place than I am today. I wanted to talk a little bit about our criminal justice system and where we are as a country today. When I was first born, we had 300,000 people that were incarcerated in this country. In my short 53 years on the planet, we now have 2.3 million people who are incarcerated. That's a problem. That's a really big problem. As the Sentencing Project says, it's like the criminal justice system is a one-gear bike, and it's stuck in one gear. It's called the prison gear. I would like to really acknowledge that we need to get multiple gears in our justice system. And it has to be appropriate for the terrain based on what's happened, whether it means we need rehab, whether we need counseling, whether we need to learn how to treat trauma, whether we're dealing with the mentally ill. There are multiple gears that we need to shift into. A lot of what I try to do in my job is propose alternatives to incarceration. So don't just tell the judge, oh, don't lock her up. Give them a plan. Make a plan that's different. make a plan that's better, that's about connection, that's about compassion, that's about re-emerging from incarceration as the only option. I want to share a story with you about one of my clients. And actually, this was a client that that David and I had together. David was the attorney, and I was the investigator. And my first trip down to Cheshire Correctional Facility in New Hampshire, I sat down across from this young man. And at some point in the conversation, I said, well, clearly, you're really intelligent. And he had this look of absolute shock on his face. And it dawned on me that nobody had ever said that to him in his life. On my subsequent visits, I came to find out that as a child, he had been left on the front stoop. His mother was addicted to crack cocaine. He was left in a diaper and had big sores all over his body. And the neighbors had finally called Child Protective Services. And throughout his life, he was in and out and in and out. His first stint was at age 12 in a juvenile detention center. Then he went back in at 14. Then he went back in at 16. And what was remarkable about him is that he decided that I was his confidant, and he started writing poetry. To this day, I receive these big, thick envelopes with his poetry. He's got the most amazing handwriting of anyone I've ever seen. But when I would connect with him when he would get out of prison, it was so eye-opening to me. He would get a voucher for the La Quinta Hotel for 2 nights. And he'd have a bag, a plastic bag with his belongings in it. And when the vouchers ran out, he had to go to the homeless shelter. And within 2 or 3 weeks, he would inevitably have somebody in City Hall Park steal his plastic bag, and he would stab them, and he'd go back in. And I would start to visit him when I would go to the facility, and I would walk in, and I'd say, well, what happened? And he said, I don't know, I don't know how to live out there. I don't know how to do it. I don't know when dinner's gonna be. I don't know how to talk to women. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to live. What's happening at Dismas House is teaching people how to live. When people have been pushed to the edge of the herd for so long and marginalized and not allowed to be seen as human beings, they forget how to be human beings. Things that we take for granted, little brushes of humanity, waving to your neighbor, going to the supermarket. He said to me, I can't wait to have a set of keys. It never dawned on me that you haven't had a set of keys in a decade. I can't wait to wash my dishes. Things that we take for granted that are gifts. Gifts to walk to the mailbox and get your mail and say hello to your neighbor, to mow your lawn, to be human. So what's happening at Dismas House, from my perspective, it's actually a spiritual experience, what's happening at Dismas House. We are all connected. We are all connected. And you are acknowledging that. You are seeing people in a way that they need to be seen, which is honoring their humanity and seeing them as human beings. And for that, hats off. And for anybody else in the room that gets tired while we're doing this work, and at the end of the day, you kind of wonder sometimes, am I making any difference? What I say to you is you are making a difference. Look at the people that have gone through Dismas House. And Rita, I have to say, the fact that this is grassroots, that you saw a problem, you and others, and you said, I am part of this community, I see a problem, I can make a difference. One human being to another human being, I can make a difference, and you did it. And you did it. You, the big you. And that is so inspiring to me, to say there's a problem, we can make a difference. And I just wanted to say that understanding brokenness is really important. Understanding our own brokenness and understanding the brokenness in others is actually what gives us real mercy for each other. I have a woman who's actually a pastor that works in Montpelier who said to me at one point, every one of us has almost it was sort of a visual, she said, has a little piece of a mirror inside them. And when that mirror gets cracked, when you're a child, let's say something happens to you, somebody hurts you in some way, when light hits that mirror and it bounces sideways and it refracts, that's actually the way that I now see crime. I see crime as when something's been broken, things are going to come out sideways. So if we can see our fellow humans with all of their flaws and all of their mistakes and all of their vulnerabilities, and if we could see ourselves with our vulnerabilities and our flaws and all of our mistakes and have compassion for not only ourselves, but for the headlines that you see where you think, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine what that person was thinking or what they were doing. Whenever I've gone in and gone deep and found out what that story was, I feel nothing but compassion. So thank you for the work that you've all been doing. Keep up the good fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. And bring your friends. Give lots of money. Tell your friends to give lots of money. And come make a meal and come join us. Thank you for letting me speak.